Think I might have answers. Let's talk some Chiefs, guys. Welcome to the Chief of the North Thursday edition. You can call it the mailbag. You can call it burning questions. I call it a lot of fun. You guys ask questions. I try to provide some answers. I missed you guys this last Tuesday between traveling from the Bills game and a few technical mishaps that were undoubtedly my fault. I was unable to record our usual Monday/Tuesday morning Chief of the North. And so you guys know the drill by now. It's Thursday. We're doing mailbag. You can submit questions either on Twitter on Wednesday when I put forth a tweet and I say, put forth? Is that the word? Yeah, sure. Why not? And when I tweet out mailbag, and you can reply to that there, or you can put it in the comment section here, not the live stream, the comments thereafter. It's a little bit easier for me to sift through. That's where I'm going to try to start every week, and that's where I'm going to start this week. I've got 2 mailbag questions from there, and then we're going to get into it. You guys had a bunch of questions. I'm going to try to get through as many as I can, and I'm sure by the end of this, I'm going to be apologizing for not getting to all of them. It's been a bit of a tough week for Chiefs fans, but it's still a good week to be a Chiefs fan. So we're going to get started. In terms of anything about being at the Bills game live, I did write about some of the issues that I saw with the offense in the Chief of the North newsletter. I'm going to be writing about the Patrick Mahomes film review, and I'm going to fold in some offensive line review in that. I always chart flushes or snaps where the pressure gets home too quickly for the quarterback to really do anything about it. This time I'm going to fold into that where the flushes came from. What player might be to blame, or whether it was a schematic thing, a player left unblocked, something like that. So that's something to look forward to. Be sure to do all the like and subscribe and YouTube magic things that Ryan would have you do, that I'm sure I'll have names that I should know. All right, let's get into it. Adam6 asks, and again, this is from the comment section from last week. Would it be crazy to have Brown play left guard and Tooney play left tackle? I think if you took out the human element to it, then I don't think it would necessarily be completely crazy. I do think the fan base has this idea of Tooney as a left tackle in their mind, that maybe it would work. I think we tend to fall in love with the unknown and the hypotheticals. It's one reason why we're so high on rookies right when they come in, and then we tend to give up on them so quickly, because the minute they're not an unknown, we tend to, okay, they're not great. We move on to the next thing. I feel like Joe Tooney playing left tackle has kind of reached that almost mythical, 7th round pick that we really like, or undrafted rookie free agent that they paid an extra $100,000 for. I feel like it's kind of reached that mythical status. He played a solid, not great, solid game at left tackle for part of one game with Orlando Brown out. That is not a great sample size for that kind of thing. It's not a game where anyone was scheming against him. It's not a game where anyone had any tape on him playing that position. He showed good feet, good technique, the things that you would expect from him. But it's a tall order to shift positions like that. Generally speaking, if a guy could play tackle, he would. Now, that's not 100% true all of the time. Get a guy like Tyler Smith that they expected to play guard. He starts playing tackle, plays really well. Tooney does have some physical limitations in terms of arm length, in terms of his general size. He's not a prototypical tackle. It doesn't mean it would be impossible for him to do it. It means he would be the outlier. He would be the very rare guy to succeed with arms his length at that position. And Orlando Brown playing guard is kind of an unknown as well. It really isn't quite that simple, generally speaking. And the reality is not just in terms of the human element of playing a position that you haven't played. There's the human element of what that does with the locker room, what that does with guys in terms of morale. That part doesn't really matter to me as much. They're professionals. They get paid a lot of money to do this. But I don't think it's quite that simple. I don't know if it would be crazy, but I think there's a reason that they haven't tried it. And I think that's just because the human element of it makes it a lot more difficult than just switching spots. It's kind of like people always want to switch guys from left tackle to right tackle. And when you talk to different offensive linemen about that, it's very different depending on the offensive lineman. It's not always that simple. Craig in the QC says, greatest Chief on 3rd and long. Patrick Mahomes or Derek Thomas? That's a really good question. I really like that. Derek Thomas is one of the best 2 or 3 pass rushers to ever live. Patrick Mahomes is arguably the best quarterback in history on third down. I think I'm going to give the narrow edge to Mahomes, the reason being that statistically he's better than anyone in history on third down. Thomas is close. And that's, when you're talking about all-time greats, you almost have to pick nits a little bit. And that's what I would have to do is I'm just going to, because I love both players. I think both players are all-timers. I just have to go with the fact that with Thomas, there are some players that you could at least argue were statistically as productive as he was on third down. The Lawrence Taylors of the world, the Reggie Whites of the world. Whereas with Mahomes, we have the ability to break down. I wrote about that last year, the year before, on the Chief of the North newsletter, that statistically we can see that Mahomes is significantly better than anyone's ever been on third down. And it's not particularly close. And so I give him the narrow edge. But again, you're picking nits when you're talking about all-time greats like these guys. All right, moving on to the Twitter questions. Again, those of you who are watching here, comment after the video, put mailbag or a bunch of question marks or something like that to where I can identify it easily and quickly. Jiffy asks, what would your hypothetical trade package for Brian Burns look like? This is an interesting question to me because it kind of folds in another question that Jiffy asked in terms of, should the Chiefs trade for someone? If they trade for someone, who would it be? The reports regarding the Panthers is that Brian Burns is not one of the players they're looking to move. I personally am not sure if that's not a little bit crazy on their part, considering he's in the second to last year of his rookie deal. And that's if he's in the last cheap year of his rookie deal. And then next year, he'd be I think a 15 or 16 million cost. Still cost control for a really, really, really good pass rusher, but not the crazy cheap part of the rookie deal. And then after that, they could franchise tag him. They know they're not contending this year. And it would be the height of hubris to think that they're going to contend next year. And so to me, it's bizarre that they wouldn't want him to try to, rebuild. They tend, from the reports from Ian Rappaport, is that they view him as kind of a foundational player. That's fair. That said, I think anyone can be had for a price, especially a guy that you're going to have to pay top end money. That's just how it's going to work. That's how it works for free agents. And so as you are moving into starting over, having a guy that you're going to pay top end money, it's a bit of a weird thing to do, but it happens. The thing with Brian Burns for the Chiefs is they need to learn a lesson from what happened with Frank Clark. The Frank Clark trade, they gave up so much that they created a situation to where if he was anything but absolutely elite, it was going to be a loss for them. And that's what happens when you give up a first rounder and a second rounder and sign a massive contract. Frank Clark's contract would still be considered a really, really, really good sized contract for a defensive end. It really was one of those market breakers. And you can't do that again. You can't make that same mistake twice. I don't have a problem trading for veteran players. I don't have a problem trading a lot for veteran players, but you have to make sure that you're not setting yourself up in a situation to where if he's anything less than absolutely elite, you need to have a situation where you're satisfied where if he's pretty good or if he's very good, it's one of those things where you can't set yourself up to fail. And so for me, if I were to make a call about Burns, one thing that's interesting about the Chiefs next year in the 2023 draft is they're set up to have a ton of picks. They're set up to have 2 third rounders, 2 fourth rounders, 2 sixth rounders, and at least 2 seventh rounders. It might be 3 seventh rounders or it might be 3 sixth rounders. Now, those 7th rounders and 6th rounders, they don't add a ton of value. But as we saw with the Tyreek Hill trade, there are things that you can throw in to kind of add to the compensation levels for something. So the Chiefs are in a position to where they could offer something like a 2nd round and a 4th round pick, and it wouldn't completely cripple next year's draft. Or they could offer a 2nd round pick and a 3rd round pick, and it wouldn't cripple next year's draft because they would still have that 3rd rounder. They'd still have their 1st rounder. I don't see them trading their 1st rounder while they're in Kansas City for the draft. And I don't think you necessarily should offer a 1st rounder for Burns. And there's a reason for that for me. That reason being one of the things we talked about last week with Orlando Brown Jr., who I think low-key had an improved game against the Bills. I didn't chart them, but I did go back and review every snap of the first half. And there's a reason the Bills switched Von Miller from his side to Wiley's side. And that's because though Brown gave up a couple of pressures to Miller, overall, he was winning that matchup, which that's not to say anything about the rest of the year that Brown has had. He's had a tough year. Everyone knows that. That's something that is just well known. But against the Bills, at least in the first half, he actually played really well against Miller on passing downs in particular. And by and large, the pressure was not coming from his direction. And that's the reason why the Bills shifted Miller to the other side. If you want to know whether or not the coaches for the other team think a player was playing well, watch what they do to adjust for him in the second half. And that's exactly what they did with Brown. So that's at least interesting. But barring him playing exceptionally well the rest of the year, if you're the Chiefs, I just don't see the ability of offering that top tier contract. So the reason that comes into play with that first rounder is a first rounder, and maybe even moving up in the draft a little bit, is how you replace a left tackle. That's kind of the only way to do it, at least in a way that's a little more of a sure thing, at least. Otherwise, it's just tough to get left tackles, and that's one of the reasons they traded for Brown in the first place. So if I were to offer something for Burns, I think if I were the Chiefs, you could do something like a second rounder and a fourth rounder, or even a second rounder and a third rounder, and see if they bite. One thing that separates him from Frank Clark in terms of the money side of things is that because he's got the rest of this year, and then next year he's got the 5th year of his rookie deal, and then the year after that you have the franchise tag. It's a little bit of a different situation than Brown being in the very final year of his rookie deal, or Frank Clark being on the franchise tag, to where you've got a little bit more cost control measures effectively in place already. So that's what I would do. I wouldn't go with a first rounder. I mean, I tend to not value draft picks the way other people do, but that's generally the direction that I would go. Spend a lot of time on that because I've spent a lot of time thinking about that for a player that I doubt they're even probably trying to trade. But I do think if you're going to trade for one position, I know there's a lot of conversation about the offense right now, about the receivers. I think Juju Smith-Schuster deserves more love than he's getting. I think he's someone that they should continue to look for if the teams continue to try to play man coverage on them. I think Sky Moore should get more snaps. They're treating MVS as kind of their number one guy right now. I'd love to see that more with Juju Smith-Schuster, with Sky Moore getting more reps. And so I think there's more answers within the offense in terms of receivers than there is on defense in terms of the pass rush. All right, let's keep moving. Brian Case, how do the Chiefs beat the 3-rush, 8-drop defense? People are noting that on some crucial downs against the Bills, the Bills rushed 3, dropped 8. The Chiefs didn't necessarily have an answer for it. And I don't know if that's quite the right way to frame it in terms of not having an answer. One of the reasons, so take one of the 3rd and 6 play where Mahomes was sacked by Von Miller. It wasn't some magic of the rush 3, drop 8. It was the fact that Andrew Wiley was left alone on an island against Von Miller. That's not a position he ever should have been put in, especially when they are, rushing 3, dropping 8. And they collected a sack. The Chiefs actually had a pretty decent shot play dialed up to Moore that might have had a chance. They had someone crossing the field as well. So I don't think there's any magic to that. People tend to view it because they still talk about the AFC Championship game as though what the Bengals did that game in terms of rushing 3, dropping 8 was kind of like a magical formula against the Chiefs. It was something they were doing in the first half too. And the Chiefs were absolutely dicing them up. Mahomes played poorly in the second half. That's what happened that game, by and large. And then Kelsey dropped a pass he should have caught. Tyreek Hill dropped 2 that he should have caught, including the game-ending interception. So this goes into Brian Case's second part of his question. Why does a great coach like Andy seem to get caught so often with a poison pill defense? I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I do think you're onto something, Brian, in the idea that Andy tends to run his stuff, and his stuff is almost always exceptional. And so that's why you almost always see maybe a bit of a delay in responding. He does. Like, this idea that he doesn't adjust during games at all just isn't true. But it is slower than I'd like to see. And I do think that's because over the years, I think Andy has learned to put trust in his offense, trust in his play calls, trust in his designs. And so he tends to give it a little extra time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So that's why I think the fact that he is a great coach at times gets in his way, because he's waiting for it to kind of start working again like it normally does. Keith Elliott asks, hi, Seth. Hi, Keith. At times we've heard in the past some of the O-line protection problems have come from Mahomes' movement or leaving the pocket too quickly. Are we seeing some of that this year, Or is a lot of the pressure coming from good pass rushers just beating our line? It's more on the line this year, but against the Bills, I haven't charted the snaps yet. But when I rewatched every snap of the first half using the Madden cam, there were a couple times that Mahomes was looking jittery, and I thought that live as well, where he's not in a place where he's trusting the protection. Now, the answer to that, the counter to that might be, well, would you? Fair enough. But that is something that I think people should be keeping an eye on. It's kind of started off with the narrative so quickly was the offensive line is struggling that Mahomes' occasionally bad habits in the pocket are now getting completely ignored. So check out the Mahomes film review. Should be dropping Friday, maybe Saturday morning. We'll see how things go in terms of getting some work done here. I'm going to be addressing that, chicken or egg. Was it Mahomes? Was it the line? Was it both? And where in the line were the problems? Adam Gabriel Jensen says, what is your dream starting offensive line in 2023? Dream big, but be plausible. That is, players actually available and factor in reasonable compensation. Dream starting offensive line in 2023. I think that they could find there are ways to get right tackles in free agency. They could have actually had a few this year. And so I would say a free agent right tackle with Wiley being relegated back to the backup role in terms of being able to back up multiple positions. There's incredible value in that. I like Wiley as a player. I just don't think he's a 17-game starter necessarily. I think he is a player worth a few $1,000,000 a year who has incredible value in the ability to back up really 4 positions along the line, and you can slide him in there, and it's not going to be a complete catastrophe. That's a really big deal. Left tackle, I think right now would be a rookie. I don't see any left tackles that are necessarily available that they're going to be able to make happen. So that really would be it. And I know maybe that's not dreaming big enough, but that to me, in terms of how you can acquire those guys, that's just the way it should look to me. Iced Pyro asks, given how Geno Smith has looked this year, what do you think the Chiefs would have looked like if they drafted him instead of trading for Alex Smith? Also, what is your favorite running gag in Calvin and Hobbes? Mine is the snowman. Calvin and Hobbes, great stuff. I talked about this on Times Ours, which I assume is why you're asking that. I have like the collection of Calvin and Hobbes. Well, I don't anymore because the books are basically destroyed. Or as my wife would phrase it, they've been well read and well loved by my kids. And so eventually I'm going to have to get the whole collection again. If you've never read the 10-year anniversary piece that Watterson put out, it was really good, where he talked about some of the stuff he went through while he was writing it, some of his thoughts on it. My favorite running gag, yours is the snowman. I think mine is Hobbs tackling Calvin every time he comes home. I don't know why. That makes me laugh every time. Or the fact that they fight every time they do the Get Rid of Slimy Girls Club. That makes me laugh too. The Geno Smith question is really interesting to me, and I've thought about this a lot. So I throw myself into the list of Geno Smith truthers where I was like, I think you can draft him first overall. I think you can. I thought he threw a gorgeous deep ball in college. He was obviously throwing to Tavon Austin and I don't remember his first name, Bailey. What's interesting is those two were considered surefire can't miss prospects, and that's why Geno Smith was kind of downgraded. Bailey obviously got hurt, but neither of them have had particularly impressive pro careers, which kind of makes the chicken and egg question. Did Geno Smith make them look better with his particular skill set? Threw a gorgeous deep ball and was pretty calm in the pocket. And he throws an accurate ball. Those were things like when people talk about, the offense is a little gimmicky. Oh, he's throwing to these good receivers. To me, some of the criticisms of Geno Smith weren't necessarily about how he played. And it reminds me, in a sense, a very loose sense, of some of the criticisms of Patrick Mahomes, not really having to do with how he played. People would say, well, he's playing these garbage Big 12 defenses. Well, an accurate throw is an accurate throw is an accurate throw. A good throw, a pro throw, pocket presence, no matter who the pass rusher is, if he's beating your left tackle and you're moving well away from it and you're creating a play, or you're staying calm in the pocket, which is more what Geno Smith would do, that matters. And I think that he showed that in college. And you know how it can be in the NFL. If your first opportunity doesn't work out, and it was the Jets, come on, it can be really tough to get another genuine opportunity. We don't think Steve Carell is some kind of QB guru. So I do think that it would have at least been interesting. Seeing the level he's playing at now, had he been taken by the Chiefs, coached by Andy Reid, placed in that offense. The one thing with that, though, is if it's Geno Smith who's playing is about the same level as, say, Alex Smith played, which is taking a pretty big jump. Alex Smith was good with the Chiefs, but we see what Geno Smith's doing this year. Let's say he played about as good or maybe just a little bit better than Alex Smith. Then maybe the Chiefs don't, if it's like a guy that they drafted, maybe they don't take a chance on Mahomes. So I will take it where they're at. I'm happy with where they're at. We got time for just a few more. Man, I spent too much time on these, but I'm sorry. That's just how it is. Kurt Whitty asked, will Fortson ever be integrated into the offense other than the goal line situations? I don't know, but it bugs me, honestly, because they're looking for guys that can win against man coverage, and he can. Not necessarily separation, but in terms of some of those, we've seen it with Mike Williams, Mike Evans, and those are obviously great receivers. I'm not saying Fortson's on their level, but he has ball skills and size. Let him go out there and just beat man coverage. That's been frustrating for me, especially with teams playing man coverage against them now. Steven Acton asks, considering the current trade market, which position would you try to upgrade first? Wide receiver, edge, or right tackle? Right tackle is at least worth talking about. I doubt that's the direction they go. For me, it would be edge, though. Melody asked me the same thing. Edge rusher would be my main thing. And that's because I don't think they have answers in-house. Wiley has played competently enough at times. He's an average player. That's not a shot at him. It's just, it is actually a compliment. It's hard to have average players across your line. But with average players, it's not like it's constantly going to be this. With average players, especially on the line, it's more like, you got your line here, and it's just going to be up and down and up and down and up and down. And that's just going to be how it goes. Whereas I don't see the Chiefs having answers in the pass rush along the defensive line. Dunlap hasn't been as good as Ingram was last year. He's been average. He's been fine. He hasn't been bad. Frank Clark this year hasn't been bad. He's been okay. He's been average. Mike Dana is average. I mean, they've got a bunch of average guys. They've got Karlaftis, who, again, has been kind of up and down because he's a rookie. He's got flashes of more than average, but I wouldn't even really call him quite above average yet. Maybe above average. So you've got Jones, maybe above average guy, and then a bunch of average. And you need at least two guys in the pass rush. 3 is really what you need. You need, an elite guy and 2 above average guys. And then you can surround them with a bunch of average and you are cooking with gas, but that's not what they have right now. And I don't see I don't see an answer in-house for them right now. So I think they should trade for it. Mark asks, can you please do that gospel presentation you were talking about, preferably with a Hammond organ playing in the background? Well, you see, Romans 5 says that. No, I'm kidding. I can't do that right now. Ryan would kill me. I would just say, you know what? If you ever want the full-fledged gospel presentation from me, for one, you could probably find a sermon I did somewhere. Or for 2, DM me, and I would be so thrilled to give you a call and talk to you about it. Partly because I just like freaking people out. It's a lot of fun. People ask you at the market, or something like that. Your cashier's checking out, like, how you doing today? Man, I'm blessed. And you can see their eyes get big. They're like, please don't say anything else. And it's hilarious every single time. But if Nate is going to be dropping F-bombs on Times Ours, I think it's only fair that I bounce it out with that. That's just my opinion. I guess we'll see. I don't know. NJOI Football asks, have QB pressures jumped the shark? I've been on the take for 2 years that sacks are undervalued. The league is not full of pocket statues anymore. While pressures can still affect mobile QBs, nothing beats a takedown. Pressure does not affect Lamar Allen the same as Brady. I disagree that pressure doesn't affect Lamar and Allen the same as Brady. I would agree it doesn't affect them the same. It does affect them. Is the pressure as good as sack? Of course not. And I think some of the conversation about pressures and sacks has become a little convoluted. I think there's been so much pushback against the idea of using sacks as the end-all be-all that there's kind of become this idea that pressures are more important than sacks. Pressures are more predictive than sacks. Like if a team's getting a lot of pressure, they're more likely to get a lot of pressure in future games. A game with a lot of sacks tells you some, but not as much. Pressure to sack conversion, that tells you something too. So it's all kind of combined. I do think that's a good example of where arguing against one thing has led to taking a very strong position on pressures that can almost be taken too far. And that happens all the time in sports, where you're arguing so hard that, player A is better than player B, that you make player A sound like a flawless all-pro, when really what you're trying to do is argue against player B. And so that I could see that happening with pressures and sacks. Um, we're just gonna do a couple more. Oh man, I wish I had more time. Um, Tadashi Jr. asks if the Chiefs and Bills play again, do you think they will take any game plans from this game, or to be completely different, seeing as both teams did stuff differently than years past against each other and will be ready for those curveballs? I expect the next game to be a shootout. This game was red zone execution by both teams away from being in the 30s and maybe the 40s. So I expect the next game to be a shootout as well. I think it's a combination of both. They'll take some of the things, some of the weaknesses they saw. The Bills are definitely going to try to run the ball. They are going to try to mess with them in terms of pressures. And in terms of they're probably going to, rush 3, drop 8. They're probably going to do some of that same stuff. The Chiefs are probably going to blitz the daylights out of Allen again because honestly, by and large, statistically, they had a lot of success blitzing him. You just got to pick your spots correctly because all it takes is one bad play and boom, touchdown. Matt Hudd asks, are we not using running plays from under center enough and letting Clyde hit the defense at speed? Running from the gun seems to be leaving them in a lot of second, third, and long. Yes, I completely agree with that. I think that's a problem. It's something that they need to be doing more often. All right. I am going to do one or two more. Off-platform throws asked, do receivers just bounce back from an ACL tear suffered 9 months ago, like back to normal, no problem? No, not usually. And that slides into Michael Arnett asks, if we get OBJ, Odell Beckham Jr., how would he fit in the offense? How do you think we would use him? Who would see less snaps because of him? It's hard to say who they would rotate out. I know who I would rotate out, but they continue to treat MVS as their main guy and Juju along with him. That's frustrating for me. I think you would see fewer snaps probably for at the moment the combination of Sky Moore, McCole Hardman, and Justin Watson. That said, by the time he's able to come in and get integrated into the offense, that could be completely different. I would say the first question that I answered in terms of an ACL tear, and then the second question, those two really fold into one another. The idea that Odell Beckham Jr. is going to walk in the door and do exactly what he did for the Rams last year, maybe he will. It's hard to say, but that's a lot to count on 2 years in a row. And I think Chiefs fan should be cautious in terms of what they expect with that sort of thing. Just because, again, it's just a very dangerous game to play to count on. Every injury is different. And it is going to be a lot for him to come back and be a really good player after an ACL tear. I'm going to finish on this one. Bono asked, does McDuffie fix all our problems? Trent McDuffie fixes all problems for everyone. No, I'm kidding. But he does help out the defense a lot. I'm excited to see him back. Having him and Willie Gay Jr. should, in theory, help the defense a lot. I think we're going to know more about the team after the Niners game than we really learned about them in the Bills game, where I didn't really learn anything new about the Chiefs during that game, honestly. They lost to a good team. Both teams played maybe a B game, and the Bills won. Didn't really tell me anything about them in terms of who's good, who's not, what they struggle with, what they don't struggle with. So I'm excited to see what the defense looks like against a team that they should be able to beat in the Niners. The offense to have an opportunity to have a bounce back game against a good defense, even though they're struggling with injuries and just came off a shellacking at the hands of the Falcons. But the Niners do have a good defense. This is an opportunity for the Chiefs to bounce back. All right, that's all the time I have. I've already gone over the time that I've always told Ryan that I would do. I appreciate your questions as ever. Don't forget to leave some here. Don't forget to respond next week on Twitter. Don't forget to check out the NFL 33 Substack that Ryan and the gang are doing. Don't forget to check out the Chief of the North newsletter. I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate you commenting. It really is a good week to be a Chiefs fan. I'm excited for next week. Thanks again. We'll do this again soon.